In Buddhism, we talk about suffering and clinging and attachment. But can suffering also come from disconnection? Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to the Death Dhamma Podcast. I'm a Buddhist practitioner out here in the world, having experienced the loss of my loved ones and knowing how much my Buddhist practice helped me on my grief journey. And now, together, we have this safe space to discuss death, dying, grief, and the Buddhist teachings that help us really understand attachment, impermanence, being compassionate, being death ready, what it means to live a life so that we can have a peaceful death. Yep, it's a big topic, and we're going to take it on together. Let's go. Reverend Christine Davies has lots of experience of being a patient in our hospital system, perhaps too much. Yet, it is that experience which led her to tend to the spiritual needs of others in similar situations, and to help ease their suffering by listening and being with the sick and the dying, and acknowledging how separation from self or from the divine is a form of suffering. Welcome back to the Death Dhamma Podcast. Today we have Reverend Christine Davies with us. She's many things, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit. A hospital chaplain, a writer, and I love this phrase, an evangelist for grief. She says she's very progressive and sometimes she curses. I love that she described herself that way. And she also has experience in cognitive behavioral therapy, Reiki, and she is a seminary professor. And on top of that, a triathlete and a beekeeper, which in my head, then I'm thinking, yeah, so if there's a misunderstanding with the bees, she can run away really fast. Maybe. I don't know. So welcome, Reverend Christine, and thank you for being here. And perhaps you would like to elaborate on these different things that I have said about you.
Sure. And please call me Christine. I like to keep busy, so doing lots of different things. But I do think that how I view my main calling is really to be with others who are suffering. And whether that's as a hospital chaplain or teaching students and clergy how to better, be at the bedside of someone who is suffering or dying. And then in my spiritual direction practice, I work individually with people to really discover how they can deepen their own spiritual life and ask the larger questions that society doesn't always allow for, and have longer term relationships. And then the other stuff I just do for fun, that's what sustains me.
That is so important. And part of the reason that, I'm asking you to be here today is because you are a person who helps others with suffering. And this season, that's something we're investigating is, people who are working to help others. And so, in Buddhism, there's the second noble truth, which is the truth is that there's suffering or discomfort. I want to know, when you think of suffering, how would you describe what is the human conditioning of suffering in your way?
Yeah. So the way I tend to think of it is similar to how I identify spiritual distress. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It's a little bit more of a clinical term that we'll use in hospital chaplaincy. But in the overview is essentially we are feeling disconnected from either ourselves, our community, our friends, our family, or that which is transcendent. For some people, that might be God. For some people, that might be the universe. So kind of in those three realms, any sort of break that is coming up for us within those realms. So like feeling like I'm not in touch with myself, or that my body is betraying me in some way, or feeling though, the grief over being disconnected from other people, whether that's through death or that's through, a fight or something like that. And then feeling disconnected from a relationship with something greater than myself. So for some people, that might be the divine, or not being able to go out into nature and experience the sacred there. So suffering to me is any time that there's a break between an aspect of our spiritual selves, because people can go through difficult things and not experience that break. Right. And then that's just adversity. It's something hard that they're getting through. But for me, the suffering comes in the relation, how it impacts the relationship with their spiritual self.
I really see your point. Thank you. That yes, that when we're out of balance, when we have that break and then we face something difficult, it's like you said, it's the difference between adversity and suffering. Adversity when I'm strong and I'll say shored up in these different areas, right? But when I'm
Mm-hmm.
not, when something's out of balance and a difficult thing happens, then it
Mm-hmm.
really can transition from this is a difficult thing to really deeper suffering. And
Or
so,
if the difficult thing throws us off of balance too,
as they do,
either way,
right?
we could be off
Yes.
of balance to begin with, or it could be that thing completely topples us.
Yes, absolutely. That makes sense. That makes a certain kind of sense. So, can you share with us an experience of when you like really came to terms with or connected with this truth?
Yeah, I think early on, and it's very much a part of my what in clergy circles sometimes referred to as a call story, right? Why is it that we do this work that we do? Why do you choose to sit with people that are suffering? This today when we're recording this just happens to be bring your child to work day.
Oh,
I couldn't
okay.
bring my kids to work, for that reason. I'm like, it's not a normal job. But what led me down this path early on was having a lot of medical issues
Okay.
and not being sure what they were and going to doctor after doctor and kind of getting dismissed and not being so impressed with people's bedside manner necessarily.
Okay. Yeah.
And and eventually I got diagnosed with generalized epilepsy, and then that diagnosis brought a lot of relief, and but it was a lot of hospitalizations, a lot of guesswork, a lot of trial and error, and medications, and really feeling myself a little far from God in that, and trying to
Hmm.
understand, why is this happening? And in Christian circles we sometimes talk about the dark night of the soul, and feeling a bit of that, especially before I got the diagnosis, because I was wondering, is this in my head? What was in my
Right.
head, just in a different way than I was initially realizing. And so, and prior to that, I had thought that I would be a physician. That was where I thought I was being called to go, and
Hmm.
recognizing, no, that's not what I'm feeling drawn to anymore, because I actually experienced more healing from people that were sitting with me in that new diagnosis and acknowledging what was going on for me and giving me what I would call spiritual care, in that. And I found more healing in that than the traditional medicine.
You spent a lot of time in hospitals, and so you had a lot of time to experience the difficulties, the challenges, the feeling alone, the questioning yourself, like you knew something was wrong, but if somebody couldn't figure it out, then it led you to think, am I making this up? Are they implying I don't mean to put words in your mouth. Are they implying that I'm making this up? And it seems like all of that came together for you to realize that this is a place for you to be helping others so that others don't have to have a difficult experience like you did. And
Mm.
so you went through this difficult, dark time. And from that, I think you emerged wanting to prevent as much as possible that type of dark time for others who are hospitalized. Is that fair to say it that way?
I think that is a beautiful characterization. You said it so much
Oh,
more succinctly than I can.
well, that's because I'm on the listening end, right? So it's easier. And so I when I'm curious about this, and you mentioned that where you got the most relief was from people who sat with you. Do you
Mm.
recall, was there any one special person or persons who you really think of who really helped you through that time and really served as your motivation for becoming the person that you are today?
Mm. Yes, the church that my family and I attended had just received a new associate pastor who's
Hmm.
right out of seminary. And she took me out to dinner and just talked with me about, okay, what was it like to, be on all these medications, have the side effects, lose my license, and really listened. And looking back, I'm like, oh, she was doing spiritual care. She was doing what I now seek to do for other people, to create a space for them to
Nice.
work out that meaning making that they're doing, and to give voice to the feelings that they may be experiencing.
That's beautiful. And, I think that in all of our different worlds and all of our different practices, religions, spiritualities, there are sometimes people who may have a role, but I'll say who fill it differently. And so what I'm thinking is what a beautiful person because she was really able to step into that spiritual caretaker role. And, because I'm sure she was busy with the rest of the flock and her church, and there's administration and, all that stuff. But she was able to see beyond that and reach out to you and be that spiritual caretaker. So I'm just envisioning like this, what a lovely role model and further motivation for you. And now you are that person.
Yeah. And especially seeing a woman who was a minister, which up until that time, I had not had examples of that, and recognizing the power of healing in that spiritual sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true too, isn't it? There weren't that many. I mean, we still don't have a lot, but we have more role models of women in this kind of a situation. And so that was another, they always say we need that representation. No matter who we are, we need that representation. So I get that. And so just to circle back, now you're out there working in the world to help with suffering. And it sounds like a lot of your emphasis is the hospital work. In that work, if you had to say, like, what is the most common suffering that you're encountering with the people you're helping? Is there a situation or a way in which you would say, here's the most common thing I find challenging?
It varies certainly based on different circumstances and individuals, but I think a theme that I see over and over again, that I might see more as a hospital chaplain than others may see, is anger at God, or anger kind of at the universe, as people are trying to make meaning of things. And sometimes I think people share that with me because they may be afraid to share that with their particular religious leader, especially if they think, oh, this is blasphemy, or they've been told other things at some point in their life that they're not allowed to give voice to this frustration. But that is one we see quite a bit. And I think it stems from how someone is making meaning of their suffering. And so, when I hear people say, like, I have this new diagnosis of lung cancer and I never smoked a day in my life, and really trying to grapple with, why is this happening? And sometimes the beliefs that we have been raised with or have somehow internalized wind up working against us in that way. Because if I was, going to a house of worship where they were telling me, oh, this might be a test from God, that makes me have certain feelings toward,
right,
that
like, why
divinity.
are you doing this to me? Why do I need to be tested?
Exactly. And there's so many kind of well-meaning but problematic religious platitudes that I hear people say again and again. And a lot of times they're coming from other individuals onto the person who is suffering. And so a lot of my work, especially as I train interns and other clergy, is not to perpetuate, these beliefs, like, something like, oh, well, everything is happening for a reason, or God needed another angel. And, these things that are not necessarily even biblical, when we put our beliefs onto other people, it silences their ability to talk about their suffering in a way that can be so harmful. So that's a lot of what I tend to see in my day-to-day work.
I see that because, again, across our different traditions, I think there are things that we say as human beings to other human beings. And in the past, before I went through my visit with grief in, more in depth, I said, I can look back and go, oh, Margaret, just shake my head at different things I said, and realizing that I was saying them because I didn't know what to say, and because it's what I had heard other people say. But so often things like, well, he or she was too good to stay on this earth, or everything happens for a reason. You're not given something that you can't handle.
Yeah. Oh, I hear that one a lot.
That's always that's a nice guilt trip right there, because especially if you're going through something and it's really hard, and then you're like, okay, I was given this because I'm supposed to be able to handle it, and I'm having a hard time handling it.
Yeah, that means that I'm failing.
Right? Like, what's wrong with me? I'm weak. I guess I'm flunking the test. But so many of these things are really designed to help others feel better, not necessarily the person who's in the midst of the suffering, right?
Right, right. And, and I'm with you. I have said these things in the past before I realized the implications. So, if your listeners realize, oh, I said that last week, no judgment like this, I've learned by making these mistakes. And then when I was suffering, hearing some of these things and realizing, okay, this isn't helpful. This is the opposite. I often think of, I had a seminary professor who said, in crisis, the best thing that you can do is show up and shut up.
I love that.
Isn't that great?
Yes, it's true.
Because your presence is meaningful when someone is suffering, but often the words can wind up hurting in ways that you don't even mean them to. But it can be hard to sit in the silence. We want to cheer people up. That is our tendency. We don't want to see people in pain. And it can be hard to sit with them in pain, recognizing we can't fix it.
You're right. You're right. I think that is certainly advice that, spans across, I think, all of our different ways of being as humans on this planet. Show up and shut up. And it's true because, and so I'll just make this about when I know that I looked back and did, not do the best that I could have done. And again, I'm not beating myself up, and neither should anyone who's listening. Definitely, it was kind of, and then the other thing we do sometimes is like, well, let me know what you need, or let me know if you need something. And then I remember when people would say that to me, I knew they meant well, but I also was like, I don't even know what to ask you for. I don't know what you need. Can you make me not be sad? Can you make people I love not be dead?
And it puts the onus on the care recipient to state it, right? When even in states of wellness, I don't always know what I need right, in a given moment, right? Versus even more so when we are going through something intense. And I think, again, it's well-meaning from the person that is posing that question. But what I suggest to people, especially, when people are going through grief or crisis and their friends or their family want to help out, is giving people a list of options rather than saying, let me know if you need anything, reaching out and saying, okay, I can bring you a meal. I can cut your lawn, mow your lawn. I can watch the kids, or all three. Pick one or pick three, and being very specific. And then they may say, you know what, I don't need my grass mowed, but I do need my laundry done. It helps them to be able to think about what are some of the practical things that I need that are going to be helpful in this moment. Or do you need someone to come and, I'm happy to sit with you and we don't have to talk about anything. Because I think that's another piece. People are afraid to bring up something, especially with people that are grieving. They say, oh, I don't want to make it worse. Like, there is no making it worse. And if you are acknowledging their pain, right, they want to be able to talk about the grief experience. And if not, for whatever reason on that day, they will tell you.
That's true. I think something that someone did for me, and even though it was later, like maybe a couple of years later, but it was still so helpful. It was one time I was commuting somewhere, and it was actually with one of my own professors, and we were driving someplace and we were talking, and out of the blue, he said, so tell me about, and he asked me to tell him about one of my deceased loved ones. And then later I realized what a kindness he was paying me, because he was letting me talk. And because, you get to this point where people don't want to talk about it anymore. They don't want to hear about it. And they don't want you to remind them that you had someone who died. And later I realized, like, wow, that was really nice,
Yes, society has moved on.
Yes.
And that's one of the great myths about grief, right? Like we expect people to get over something, but we never get over it. We move with it, and it changes us. And absolutely to give you the opportunity to speak about your loved one when a lot of people may be afraid to ask, or there's not even on their mind to ask, or they fear that it's going to make you feel worse.
Right. It's going to make other people uncomfortable. So we just shush up. I think so. You went through this experience of your own, and you saw this support of your own, and you met this female pastor of your church who really showed up as a role model for you. And then you've gone down this path. And I'm guessing there's probably been a time or two on your path where your choice was validated, meaning that you maybe had an interaction or a relationship or an experience that really reminded you, yes, I'm really where I need to be. Can you tell us something about some of those experiences?
Yeah, I think that happens, in small scale ways,
Hmm.
sometimes multiple times a week if it's a good week. But it can be something as simple as, being with a patient family and especially if I'm at their bedside at death and they say to me afterwards, just you being here made this easier. Or another one that I love is when I sometimes will do kind of routine visits. So we're just going from room to room and checking in with patients and offering emotional and spiritual support. And so I'm introducing myself as a chaplain to a patient. They might be like, "Oh, chaplain, I'm not religious." I'm like, "That's okay. I'm not religious today either. Tell me what is going on for you, and we'll talk about that."
Hmm.
And at the end, I'll sometimes have patients that say to me, when you first came in here, I didn't think I wanted to talk to you. I didn't know what you were, but now I'm so glad that I did. Or when I have patients or sometimes my spiritual directees that I'm working with tear up, or sometimes even my students and say, I've never been able to tell anyone this before. And really just creating that sacred space where people can talk about the sufferings of their lives that maybe they have been too fearful or full of shame to be able to name out loud before, and the power of that as a journey toward the healing process.
Hmm. I like that. I just want to compliment you on your ability to just flexibly, openly be there for people in a way that is supporting what they need. Whereas you come from a certain training and a certain, way of being Christian. And yet it sounds to me like you're not walking into that room and saying, like, well, in my church, this is what we do.
Yep.
And I'm going to read you
Mhm.
this passage
Oh,
because
no,
this is
no.
what
And
we'd
in
be
fact, that's
reading.
a lot of what I do is educate, people that are wanting to be chaplains or clergy that are wanting to be more effective in their spiritual caregiving. I'm like, that is what not to do. I
Right.
will sometimes go into a patient room and they're like, I haven't been to church in, 5 years. I'm like, I am not the church attendance police. I don't
Exactly.
care.
Exactly.
And meeting people where they are. And maybe they have a specific religious tradition, maybe they don't. And for me, the greater question is, how are they connecting with their spirituality?
Hmm.
Because I do believe that there is a difference between religion and spirituality, and that can help people cope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yet, because you do have, your own belief and your own church that you belong to, there are probably some practices or some passages that are really deeply meaningful and sustaining to you. And I wonder if you would want to share some of that with us.
Absolutely. And sometimes when I meet with people for spiritual direction, they're wanting to learn different practices
Hmm.
that they might not know about. So one I can share is, everyone in my life had been telling me for a long time I needed to meditate. I was like, okay, they're picking up on my, anxiety and
Hmm.
recognizing this is something that would be beneficial to me. And I tried, like I downloaded all the apps. I would go to yoga and, or different meditation classes. But when I was introduced to, there's a practice within the Christian tradition that's called centering prayer, which is essentially a Christian form of meditation, but the
Hmm.
church had gotten away from it. I only learned about it a few years ago. I didn't know about it for the longest time, and here I am. I've been a Presbyterian minister over a decade and a half. Because I don't. It's the same thing with spiritual direction. It's kind of like this best kept secret, and I'm like, wow, we need to let people know about this. But I think I have yes as to why. So centering prayer is a very simple, I call it a Christian meditation practice where you're
Hmm.
essentially naming a word. And it could be a word for God or a word that describes divinity or
Hmm.
spirit or, a characteristic. And you just return to that word over and over. And sitting with that has been really meaningful for me, and sitting in silence, which is very countercultural, and we don't have a lot of that. But that goes back to, also sitting in silence at the bedside or when someone's in crisis. So I can do that better when I can sit in silence for myself a little bit more, I find that translates well.
The silence, you're right. We are trained to fill silence. And,
Mm-hmm.
I come from a place of, of course, of meditation and sometimes using mantras or chants to help.
Mm-hmm.
And silence for me is very calming, but yes, it can be very distracting, and it's difficult for some people to be in silence. Absolutely.
Yeah, especially what's coming out too with a lot of the new research that's coming out around trauma and the way in which that manifests itself for people. They're saying silence can be, a huge trigger for some people to kind of sit in that and sit, with their own thoughts, can be overwhelming.
That is true. I will just insert quickly. There's a group where we were going and doing some meditation in the California state prison system. And yeah, we did need to learn that meditation isn't right for everyone. And especially if someone has had a certain kind of trauma, it's not possibly supportive or helpful for them to all of a sudden be told to sit in silence and sit still because, whether it's centering prayer or meditation, things are going to come into your mind.
Yes.
And depending on what you've experienced in life, it might be nice things, or things that we consider to be happy or good, or it might be the traumatic things.
Yeah, something that's overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what I've learned to do, I'll sometimes do retreats or classes in contemplative prayer. And I'll always, so if we even try, to have a meditation period, I'll always have some soft music playing, knowing that sometimes that helps people.
Yes.
And having tactile objects available if people want something like that. And then also having something where they could look at something to focus. So something as simple as, creating, having a candle or having, rocks or shells or other things available so that people have options, because what works for one person isn't going to work for everyone. Or sometimes even having journals with pens around so that they can make use of it how is going to be best for them.
That's great. That's great, because what you're doing is you're providing something for each of the different senses, because we all interact in different ways and maybe multiple ways. And so just to have those things available without even saying, like, here, Margaret, hang on to this.
And then people rebel against it. They're like, I'm not doing that. You told me to do this. But if I give them a menu, that can be
exactly. I
a little
love that.
more
And it's
inviting.
just within reach, and I can just grab a pen if I think I need to write, or I can just listen to the music, or look at something, or grab the squishy ball or whatever. But yeah, it's not forced upon me. It's not forced upon me. I love that. Well, you are in this place where you are giving and supportive. And so, there's always this thought of replenishing the well, right? And so centering prayer is helping you replenish your well. Maybe running, training for the triathlons, maybe beekeeping. But, basically, how do you maintain your reserves? So how do you keep yourself in a place of, we say equanimity, so that you can respond in a balanced way without yourself being out of alignment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And for me, so much of it shifted when I really looked at the framework, right? And changing my mindset to needing that this is a part of my daily life. And I think when I'm teaching, especially a lot of the clergy, convincing people this is a necessity. This is not a luxury. And to say that you don't need something to replenish yourself or to return you to the state of equanimity is really about denial. Right. And so for me, it's about self-awareness first and foremost. I don't know if you've ever read Rachel Naomi Remen. But she has a fantastic quote. I might butcher it, but essentially saying, it is impossible to walk through the waves and not get wet.
Yes, that's perfect.
So applying that to self-care, like it is impossible to do this work and sit with people who are suffering or whatever, your listeners are doing and not be impacted by it. So recognizing that first and foremost was a huge step for me. And then I think other things that help me And it's going to, it's going to look different for everyone. But yeah, certainly the body piece.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's some sort of movement, as someone with epilepsy, I always have to make sure I get a lot of sleep. So
Okay.
prioritizing rest,
Mm-hmm.
and what that might look like. I have a whole team of professionals that I rely on. I keep a lot of people on payroll to help me,
Beautiful.
from therapists, from my own spiritual director. I have a fantastic masseuse, with a physical trainer, but having other people that can help me, because I'm caring for so many people. So who are the people that can care for me? And then added to that, I'm fortunate to have we have a lot of I have a lot of peer groups, both like other spiritual directors that I meet with, other people who are doing hospital chaplaincy training, who just get the work. And I find those to be really supportive environments as well.
Wow. I'm so impressed, and I really admire the way in which you have acknowledged, like you said from the quote, that you can't walk through the waves without getting wet, and that you have these support systems in place. And that is really not just helping you, but it's helping all of us, because it means that you will be able to be at your best and helping us for a longer period of time, and in a much more stronger and giving way. So I think that's amazing. Unfortunately, sometimes I speak with people who, and I don't want to question their experience, but I guess sometimes I meet people that are like, oh yeah, no, it's just part of my job. I don't need to. I knew that when I signed up for it. And it's like, okay. So to each, we all have our different ways. So I guess what I'm expressing is admiration for your way of really building a support network to enable you to focus on the good work that you're doing. That's, I think, really what it's about. And so before I let you go back to your day, is there anything else you would like to share with us? Something maybe I didn't ask about that you want to make sure we, something you would like to share with us?
Well, the other day I got asked a great question. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And it was, if you only had 10 minutes to try to get in touch with your spiritual self, what would you do? I was like, oh, never thought about that before. But the answer I came up with is take a walk outside. And for me, that speaks truth in so many different ways, right? It's about that movement. It's about that getting outside of our own space, hopefully connecting with nature. And
Mm-hmm.
especially for someone who is suffering right now, just getting that breath of fresh air in the midst of overwhelm. If we are in a space where we can, notice the birds, or the sun that might hopefully is coming down, maybe it's a cloudy day. And so I just share that as an example of the ways in which you can take something so simple and make it a spiritual practice for yourself. So it's not about a list of things that you need to do, but it can be something that you might already do throughout your day. And if individuals are interested in learning more or working with me as a spiritual director, or would like a referral to a different spiritual director, they can contact me through my website, which is christinevdavies.com. And I also write a weekly-ish newsletter that you can sign up for there, or you can sign up for on my Substack, which is Journeying Alongside. And I write about different stories of suffering that I see in the hospital, the ways in which people are making meaning, and then different spiritual practices that people may want to try.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. And I did read some of your items on your Substack, and they are very helpful. They're very helpful. And as Christine has been with us today, they're very down to earth. They're very honest, and they're very caring. And so I definitely recommend, yes, definitely go check out Journey Alongside, and also visit her on her website. And thank you so much for sharing with us today. Your time and your caring and the work you do is very much appreciated. Thank you so much. I've got books for you, starting with Carpooling with Death, How Living with Death Will Make You Stronger, Wiser, and Fearless, the book that got me going and helped me to discuss going through the death of my loved ones, followed by Sitting with Death, Buddhist insights to help you face your fears and live a peaceful life, based on Season 1 of the Death Dhamma Podcast. And just recently, Enlightenment Unleashed, how your pet can lead you to spiritual transformation, because during our lifetime, we may see the rising and ceasing of many pets. and we love them like they are our family. Find these on Amazon.com or come see me at margaretmaloney.com. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, margaretmeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.